Good morning and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City have a chance to set the record straight when they face Blackburn Rovers at Carrow Road this weekend. It won't be easy. Blackburn are the Championship's form team as much as you can be after one league game. But they have really impressed in their opening two fixtures of the season, beating Stockport 6-1 in the Carabao Cup in the middle of the week, and last week on Friday beating Derby County 4-2. They have really impressed and they'll come to Carrow Road brimming with confidence and ready to deepen the misery that Norwich fans are feeling after a 2-0 loss to Oxford on the opening day. But they are, it seems, making progress. They beat Stevenage 4-3 in the Cup in midweek. There were some positive signs of the sort of football that Johannes Hoftorp is trying to see from his new players. And although it wasn't perfect, it feels like things are slowly tracking in the right direction. And there are some factors going their way from the Blackburn camp going into this one. So I'm going to give you my predicted 11 for the game, and I'm going to break it down tactically. Without further ado, here's the 11 I think Johannes Hoftorp will choose to take on Blackburn tomorrow. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Brad Hills and Shane Duffy at centre back, with Callum Doyle at left back, Kenny McLean, Marcelino Nunez and Amankwa Forson in the centre of midfield, Abu Kamara on the right of the front line, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle on his own. I think that defensive unit is where most of the debate will probably be. It's still a very interesting topic given the sort of fitness issues around there, some of the problems that there were at Oxford, and probably a difference between what fans would love to see in an ideal world and what realistically is likely to happen. Because I think most fans would have Cordoba in there as their first choice, but it didn't sound like from Torup's pre-match press conference he was really considering him for a start. Of course, he's only really had 15 match minutes since joining the club in that friendly against Magdeburg, has struggled with that minor groin issue the last few weeks. And although Torup was confident that he'd be involved in his matchday squad, I think we may well see him on the bench. And the same probably goes for Ben Krezene, who, of course, missed those last two games. Did have a few minutes under his belt in pre-season and also had a bit more of a pre-season than Cordoba did before that. But I still think in terms of match fitness, he's got a little bit of catching up to do. Doyle is fresh from a couple of appearances for Norwich already. He knows how to play that style of football already. And I think he'll want him in there at left back, even though there is obviously the issue of pace, which I think Norwich fans have already picked up on. Fans of the other clubs that Doyle's been at have already mentioned, and it does feel like both he would like to be playing at centre-back most of the time, and maybe that would suit Norwich best. But for now, they are still in a bit of a state of flux in that defensive unit. I think it will be Doyle at left-back. The good news that I'm giving you is that I'm predicting Brad Hills to start at centre-back, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to see that alongside Jayden Warner, given how I actually thought the two performed fairly well against Stevenage, even in conceding 3 goals to League One opposition. But I think Torup will go with a more moderate approach. I don't see him going for Shane Duffy and Grant Hanley again after what was a really poor performance from the duo at Oxford. I think he'll go with one of those more experienced and one of those younger, and it could end up being Hanley and Warner, I suppose. But he ended the Stevenage game with Duffy and Hills at centre-back. Hills played the full 90 minutes, and I think Duffy is just slightly ahead of Grant Hanley at the moment, especially considering that mistake that Hanley made for the opener at the Kassam. So I could see him going for Duffy alongside Hills. He tends to put the more experienced one on the left if they're both right-footed. So I could see Duffy being on the left and Brad Hills on the right. I think the rest of the team speaks for itself, really, although I suppose there is a bit of a discussion point to be had at right wing. Abu Kamara definitely in the mix after opening his account for the club in that Stevenage game. Ono Hernandez is certainly pushing his claim after 2 goals in that game. A really impressive performance, but worth remembering that was actually through the middle. I don't think he's going to start ahead of Josh Sargent. And when you consider the fact that Kamara was involved in a lot of Norwich's best passages of play off the right, it does feel like Torup maybe sees him a little bit higher up in the pecking order than Hernandez at the moment. I'd be surprised if, based on one performance as a striker, Torup turned to Hernandez as his right winger, especially after that impressive performance from Kamara. So I've gone for Kamara on the right, and I think otherwise that 11 pretty much speaks for itself. On to the tactics then, and I think it's worth starting by saying that Blackburn don't really have too much of a defined style of play or a consistent theme for what they're trying to do. John Eustace is more your type of head coach who wants to look at the weaknesses of the opposition team, try to exploit those and try to set up his team week to week to get the most out of them in specific games. And of course, there are positives to that. It means that Norwich won't 100% know what Blackburn will try to do this weekend, and they won't be able to counteract a style of play that they perform on a regular basis. Instead, they'll have to make it all about themselves. And I suppose the positive from that is that that's something they want to do. Ben Knapp has spoken about it. Johannes Torup's spoken about it. The players have spoken about it since he's come in. They do want to spend more time on improving themselves and improving what they want to do in and out of possession, and making the game about themselves rather than on the opposition. But also, Blackburn will have the opportunity to spring some surprises. They'll try and look to exploit some Norwich weaknesses, and you look at the strengths that they have, they could actually be quite problematic for Norwich and some of the issues that they're working through at the moment. One of those is how effective they are in high pressing. Last season, I think they were in the top 7 for the Championship for passes per defensive action, which is the number of passes you allow for the opposition team before you intervene and before you, I suppose, try to get involved and try to take the ball off them. Blackburn don't give teams too many touches before they get involved and before they put them under pressure. And that was borne out in the fact that they scored the second most goals in the second division last season from high turnovers. So that's something Norwich will have to be wary of. It was definitely a situation in which they looked slightly uncomfortable against Oxford. This is a slight step up in opposition probably as well, so they will really need to be switched on. That's where Hills, if he is involved, or one of the younger, maybe more capable in possession centre-backs, will have to be more involved and try to impose themselves on the game, is when that press comes, and when the pressure's on, it will be on them to keep a cool head and to progress the ball through that press, in which case there will be an opportunity for those attacking players to go and take advantage of that for Norwich. That's the whole Turret plan, but obviously Blackburn are very well practiced at this. They're very good at this, and that's something that Norwich will have to be wary of going into it. Another situation that I think could impact them is the amount of control that Blackburn have generally had on the left. Harry Pickering is a really important player for them, their left back. He gets forward a lot, and they did really well last season to control the pitch in that left-hand area. I think if you look at sort of a heat map of where they were for most of the season, the only places in the pitch they really truly controlled were their own box, which is pretty common. Almost everyone manages to do that because of obviously goal kicks, and it's quite difficult to press from those. The only areas Blackburn really had were in their own box and that left flank in the opposition half. And that could be a real problem for Norwich, because you look at the way that back four sets up. They have the inverted left back, who I've predicted will be Doyle, but whoever it is, they're very likely to be in that inverted role, as Torup has used previously. And that means that there's a lot of onus on Jack Stacey at right back to get forward and to be that outlet, that attacking outlet for Norwich. But if Pickering is pushing forward, if Blackburn are controlling that area, that may well pin him back, and that would mean the whole of the Norwich back four, when they're trying to get out, are going to be deeper and are going to be forced into those deeper positions. And it's about how then they can manoeuvre out of there and try to gain the individual advantages, which is more difficult than if you have a tactical setup that pulls the opposition team around and creates different spaces and gives you players high up the pitch for your deeper players to then go and find. And I think we've seen, even in the good and the bad times, how big of an outlet Jack Stacey has been for Norwich, both under David Wagner and under Torup so far. So that could be an issue for Norwich. It's something they'll certainly need to consider. Another strength that Blackburn have is just how efficient they are. They only produced, I think, 2 or 3 more progressive passes than Norwich did to beat Derby and score 4 goals against Derby than Norwich did to score no goals against Oxford. So they are very efficient with their passing. They're very efficient with their attacking. They counter-attack very effectively as well. So Norwich, when they lose the ball, will need to either be pressing very, very effectively, or they'll need to be slightly less aggressive and defending quicker. I would say with what Torrent wants to do, it will be more focus on pressing, more focus on when they lose the ball, stopping that counter-attack at source. But once Blackburn play out of their own half, they get in your half, they're very efficient, very good in that final third, and very clinical, actually. I think they only had an XG of around 2.1 for that Derby game, ended up scoring 4 goals. So that tells you how good that team is at finishing, and how much they will be ruthless if you give them the opportunity. But there is one major negative hanging over the collective Blackburn Rovers head, and that's Sammy Szmodics, who looks close to sealing a move to, of course, Norwich's nearest and dearest rivals, Ipswich Town. John Eustace did his press conference before a bid had been accepted from the Premier League club, so that doesn't really tell us much. At that point, he said it was business as usual, but of course, with a deal very close, you'd feel like with those funds being important ones for Blackburn, it's unlikely that he features. I mean, I think if he was asked to, he probably would, given the professionalism that he's shown in the last few weeks for Blackburn, but it does feel fairly unlikely, and that will be a serious concern for Rovers, given how important he's been in all of those strengths that I mentioned, really. The high pressing is one of those, because athletically he's one of their best players, his work ethic is fantastic, and he really helps push them up the pitch and put players under pressure consistently throughout the game. Also, that clinical finishing pretty much defined him last season and defined that team. If he hadn't made more from his XG than he probably should have, and made more of the chances that were created for him than he should have, Blackburn probably would be in League One as we speak now. So that will be a real concern for Blackburn. They don't have too many players in that area with much of a prolific goal-scoring record in the Championship. I'm sure they'll look to the market, but right now, travelling to Carrow Road, they don't seem to have a natural replacement for Szmodics, and it does look like pretty good news for Norwich. So there's an opportunity for them there. They'll certainly want to set the record straight after a poor start to the Championship season at Oxford. Either way, we'll be there to give you analysis, live updates, everything you need from the game. So go to pinkun.com/subscribe and you won't miss a bit of it. Thank you for joining me on Tactics Board. See you again next time, when hopefully things look just a little bit more positive after a win over Blackburn.